Hi, I'm Ella Farrar-Smith, founder of Do You. We want to create safe spaces for people to take part in research, but what does that actually mean? In this season of the Do You podcast, we explore what safe looks and feels like for a variety of people with different professional and lived experiences. They each share how they experience and create safety within their own practices and how they create space for themselves to do you. Welcome, Ali Kant, to the Do You podcast. Happy to have you here, chairman of Quadrangle, and also, well, I'll let you explain more to the viewers, the audience, about what you do in your own words. But involved in Pride as well.
Was involved in Pride. Yes.
No longer.
So no longer. I now have a small child, so those were 10 very happy and busy years, but life moves on.
Yes, yeah. Well, we'll talk about both of those things. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah, and I start off by asking everyone just to say briefly how we know each other.
Well, we were introduced to each other via the Market Research Society, which is our professional body. And when was that? 3 years ago? 2019?
That's a great question. It was pre-pandemic, I know that much.
Must have been 2019, so nearly 4 years ago. And I was chairing a panel session at the annual conference, and we were talking about diversity. And you were one of the people on the panel.
And actually it felt like a significant sort of time in the MRS's journey to like moving more towards
EDI and let's not forget
initiatives.
we won the best session at the conference.
Yes, we did.
So the proof of the pudding, as they say.
Yeah. So also I'm going to do like quick fire questions with you to say just single answers or quick answers. So where did you grow up?
I was born and grew up in Guildford, which is where I live now actually. So come full circle via Manchester, London, and time in as a student in France and Italy.
Favourite person in the world?
And my wife.
Good answer. Favourite thing to do as a child?
I spent, where I grew up, our house backed onto a farm. So my brother and I just spent all of our time outside building camps. So that would be camps by name, camps by nature.
Yeah.
That's what we did for years and years.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. That's like the idyllic.
Yeah, it was a bit like that, yeah.
Star sign?
Gemini.
No wonder we get on air signs. I'm an Aquarius. Favourite food?
Ooh. That's a difficult one. Probably pasta. I love all things to do with Italy, so probably pasta.
Solid answer. Your best trait?
Oh, quick thinking. I hesitated in answering there, so it's kind of not maybe credible, but yeah, quick thinking.
Excellent. And worst trait?
I would say the thing that I like least about myself is I have a tendency to react to things rather than respond to things. So if I could change one thing about myself, then it would be that.
It's interesting because it's a bit of like the inverse of quick thinking.
Exactly,
as well,
the mercurial nature of the Gemini.
Yes. Yeah. Great. So I think to start, it would be really helpful for you to just tell me about your work and like your journey in work and how you started and where you started and just like, I guess just, tell us all about that.
I mean, I don't know how this happened. I wanted to be in marketing and that was the degree I was going to do. So long story short, I chose a specific degree that I wanted to do at Salford University and set my sights on that. Very, very kind of blinkered and thankfully got the grades that I needed to get on the course and did the degree and then joined a marketing graduate scheme in a corporate insurance company when after I graduated. And it took me about 5 minutes to discover that corporate life was not really me, not really my thing. And so I resigned. And then I met a guy in a pub one night. I was out having a drink with friends, and he was a graphic designer. And we were talking, and he started telling me about this new startup that he had been doing some work with called Quadrangle. And that they were looking for a graduate. And so he introduced me, and the rest, as they say, is history. I mean, that was 33 years ago. I found a home in Quadrangle. You know, when I joined, it was a very, very small business. The two founders, John and Christine, you know, became like family to me, basically. And, you know, over the years, a lot of people have come and gone, but there are a lot of people who've been around for a long time as well. So, and the work that we do it keeps somebody with a low boredom threshold like me on my toes, because it's very fast paced, and I've learned a lot about a lot of different sectors and a lot of different types of people and a lot of different types of products and service, and that feeds my need for kind of stimulus. It would have had to have been something life-changing or extraordinary to move. I joined the board quite young, just before my 30th birthday, and you know, like I said, it's my home really.
What has enabled you to succeed, and I guess what role has safety played in your success?
I am blessed with confidence, and I like people, and I like talking to people. I didn't know much about research until, and in fact, Quadrangle in its first kind of couple of decades didn't do research. We bought in research, so we were a consultancy. It wasn't until 2007 that we relaunched ourselves. So I'm a self-taught researcher, but I discovered a love for research as I kind of grew into my role and into my career. I think to a certain extent I've been very lucky, but equally I believe that you make your own luck. So I think, you know, I landed in a place which gave me the opportunity to take responsibility. John always used to say, you know, responsibility is taken, it's not given. And I had a lot of opportunities to take responsibility, which I seized that, and was able to, you know, to kind of kick on from there. And as far as safety is concerned, I mean, I suppose I have my confidence to draw on, and I use that, but equally I, like a lot of women in leadership positions, have suffered from imposter syndrome. That's, you know, I don't actually know any woman in a position of leadership who hasn't at some point or other suffered from imposter syndrome. And to me that links into feeling safe. I came out when I was 37, so I'd already been in the business for you know, a long time, 15 years, and I was in a leadership position, and I hadn't felt safe in my personal life to come out until then. I didn't have role models who were gay when I was growing up, and it took me a long time to come to terms with my sexuality. When I did, I was all in, you know, all in, but it did take me a long time, and I think that was probably, that period of my life was the time when I felt least safe. And I remember coming out to my business partners and, you know, just stumbling over my words over dinner, and it took me hours. And of course, when I did, everything was fine, and actually they were hugely supportive and you know, really a refuge for me, literally a refuge, because I moved in with them for a while. But yeah, so I haven't, thankfully and luckily, been in many situations where I've been physically unsafe. But I do, you know, I have felt those moments when I haven't really had a home, or haven't felt that I've had a home. And actually, from my experience of being a part of Quadrangle, which has been my home for so long, actually that really compensated when I was going through it.
It's interesting, actually, just reflecting on that and thinking about workplace as family and as a refuge. It's I don't know how usual or unusual that is.
I guess it's fairly unusual, and I highly doubt that everybody at Quadrangle feels the same the same way that I do. But I know that some of us feel the same way. But I think that irrespective of how closely connected you are to a business, or whether it's just kind of a stage on your journey and you're passing through, as it were, that actually the culture that you create, the sense of identity, the sense of team and togetherness, I think is terrifically important. And I think that is, as an employer, that for me is really key in terms of having a healthy kind of culture. And that having that kind of ethos allows you to have honesty and forgiveness for when things go wrong, because they do go wrong, but a kind of actually we're in it together, That's not to say that when we are recruiting, what we're looking for is a kind of carbon copy, mini me. That's not it at all, because actually, frankly, that would be disastrous. But we do look for shared values, and we have a set of beliefs and expectations that have existed for decades, and we use that as a template against which we recruit people. Because what we have found time and time again is if we are not if we don't share fundamental values with the people with whom we work, then generally speaking, it ends up going wrong. There is a balance there, because of course you want a bit of grit in the oyster too. One of the things that we talk about with our people is the importance of bringing the whole self to work, and that includes an ability to offer a different perspective or a different lens on something. And I think what's really helps to make a healthy, inquisitive, curious, proactive, and sometimes contrarian environment.
I wanted to follow up on something you said there around sort of the bringing your whole self to it, because I think that's a really interesting conversation, because in principle, absolutely agree, think that's great, but also in practice, aware that even personally speaking, and I guess depending on what's going on in your life, it doesn't always feel safe or appropriate to bring your whole self to work.
You're right. I mean, you absolutely have got to use your judgment. And obviously I didn't bring my whole self to work for 15 years. So, and by the time I came out, I felt like a hypocrite, I mean, that's one of the things that stop people coming out later in life, is that you feel like you have lied to people about who you are for a long time. And that's a very uncomfortable place to be if you're a person for whom integrity matters. So, I mean, yes, there is, of course, in everything in moderation. But equally, there's a kind of, I suppose, a humanity in sharing things about yourself or bringing personal experience to bear that I think can really be helpful in terms of building relationships with the people you work with, but also your clients. And can be really helpful in the context of the kind of work that we do. I am very comfortable with research being subjective. I always have been. I'm not a social researcher, although I have done a lot of social research. I'm not that kind of researcher. I think that researchers should have an opinion, and too often I think that they don't. And I think that opinion is absolutely valid, because our job is to understand things better than anybody else. I mean, that's literally what we are selling. So I think we should have an opinion based on that. And I'm a big fan of subjectivity. And if you've got the data to back it up, then so much the better. Yeah. But, I like it when people disagree with my subjectivity as well, because then we've got a dialogue.
Yeah. When I talk about safe environments, safe spaces, what comes to mind? Like, what does that trigger for you?
So many thoughts, and I think that those thoughts have become more sort of top of mind over the past couple of years or so, as I think I've just become much more conscious of how easy it is for people to feel out of place. and the responsibility that we have as an industry, as a research sector, to create safe spaces, and to help people to feel in control of their participation, whether that's as a research participant or as a member of a team or whatever it is. I mean, I think the thing that triggered it for me was actually as a result of the pandemic, because of course qualitative research moved from basements in W1 to Teams meetings or on platforms, and all being done digitally. And the big difference that came, well, there were two things. One, you didn't have to have a sort of homogenous group of people who, were all recruited from North London or whatever. You could have a group of people in a focus group from up and down the length and breadth of the country. And the second thing was that people were interacting with us as researchers in their own homes. And I realised very quickly that this made for much better quality interactions, because people were literally in their safe spaces. So they felt empowered to be more honest and more reflective. So, from that, I mean, we're getting back into doing face-to-face work now, but I don't like viewing facilities. Sorry, viewing facilities, but I'm not a fan. I find them very, very artificial. So what we're trying to do now is to have conversations in spaces that are less artificial, so more relaxed, going back to very old-fashioned ways of renting rooms in hotels, because even that is less artificial than being in a viewing facility with a two-way mirror, getting clients involved in group discussions rather than having them observe them, because that's like monkeys in the zoo type scenario, and also giving people just the physical setup of rooms, so not putting in people in positions where they feel exposed, because there's nowhere to kind of the ability to sit behind something can be actually quite comforting for people. So all of that, but also in terms of actually how when you meet new people for the first time, and this is the objective-subjective piece as well. When I'm doing a group discussion, I always talk about my own experiences. I poke fun at myself. I use humour a lot to kind of, reassure people that I'm not, that actually that I'm very flawed here. So I try and reveal a bit of my own imperfection, of which there's lots to draw on. in order to make people feel, actually this is going to be fun. Actually this is not going to be a traumatic or boring experience. It's actually going to be something quite enjoyable. The other thing that I have that I'm just thinking about a lot at the moment, I don't have all the answers actually, but because it's partly to do with the way that things are done. I mean, of course we can do things differently, but there are other considerations at play that have to be. If you had the perfect world, you could do it one way, and the perfect budget, but we're all working within constraints. But I think if we look back across the sort of the evolution of the research industry, I certainly, when I started my career, I used to watch focus groups, and you'd have like one Black or Asian person in the room, and now I think, that just could not be more wrong. I mean, imagine how unsafe that must have felt for people who were in that kind of situation where you're literally being othered by the agency because you are the only one of you. And it likewise, works for any kind of minority. Somebody who has a disability, or somebody from the LGBT community, or whatever it is. But that sort of sense of inclusion is important in thinking about creating safe spaces. It's really hard to get minority voices properly heard. If you're doing a quant project and you're capturing gender, and you ask the gender question properly, then you won't just give an option for male and female. But because you're going to get such a small number who tick anything else, you can't, the rigor of it, the kind of rules of the game, so that you can't really report on those data.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to, I think, to have, and like I said, I don't have the answers. All I know is that we need to develop some.
You kind of answered this, but there's a question around, does it change depending on who you think about when you're considering safe environments and safe spaces? And we've talked about participants and team members and what that means, and just, any reflections on
Yeah, I mean, there's degrees of safety, aren't there? I mean, I think what's more difficult to address, and what's really important, I think, as leaders in the business for us to understand is that we effectively create the context. And so the environment is going to be very sensitive to how we're projecting. It's obvious. It's like, that's just, unfortunately, hierarchies work in that way, and that's just the way it is. And also you tend to have sort of quite forceful characters typically in leadership positions. So they exert an influence. And I think it's about being conscious of your impact on in different environments. Your ability to empathise, your ability to intuit is to me, those are the skills that I try to draw on when I'm thinking about creating that great environment, that right environment. And I'm not saying that that I always do it well, or that I'm always sufficiently well prepared. I try to be, but I think that thinking in advance and preparing for how you're going to create a positive environment is really, really important. I can't and shouldn't, and I probably do, but I shouldn't impose my own modus operandi, my own way of working, my own way of being on other people. They all have their own. That's why these kind of sort of working styles things, your Myers-Briggs and all the rest of it, whilst we all kind of smirk and are slightly cynical about them, actually there's a lot that can be gained from that. And when you need to have a difficult conversation, then you can't shirk that. And that's not about power, that's about honesty, and it's about actually not letting things fester, or because if somebody's not doing what they need to be doing, or they're doing something that is impacting on other people, it can be very easy to kind of shirk that sort of conversation. But actually, for everybody's safety and well-being, those conversations have to be had. And it may not, it's not nice, it's not easy, but you're running a business, and actually it's the right and responsible thing to do. It's making me think of, I worked in America for a time, and they don't shirk the difficult conversation.
They do not shirk the and actually in terms of the cultural differences,
arguably they go too far.
Well, there is that. However, that was quite a big learning curve for me in business, I suppose, realising and learning from American colleagues, and also learning to bring vulnerability directly into the communication of those, difficult conversations. I feel something that in this culture, I think we often don't,
no, we're not good at
actively avoid doing that. But realising the power of that, and sometimes just for fun, I bring that into my my British interactions just to see what will happen, because that's the kind of person I am. But no, it's quite interesting to see the response, is often visceral when you bring into a conversation, well, actually, you've made me feel, or I feel now because of this, interaction a certain way. Can we address that? It immediately sort of shuts down any messing around.
And it doesn't feel very safe probably for either party.
No.
In the moment, but actually in the longer term, I think that does create for a much better environment and understanding around where our boundaries are. That we haven't really talked about boundaries, but I think boundaries are very big when it comes to safety. And I think, and I like it when people, I might find it inconvenient at times, but I do like it when people set their boundaries.
I think most of us do actually. It's like children. We are quite like children.
Yes.
We're just still pretending to be adults often. But yeah, boundaries, if someone has clear boundaries, it just makes everything much more simple. I don't think it's easy necessarily to learn your boundaries and know them and express them at all times.
No, it makes me think about my own boundaries.
It's fascinating actually thinking about that, and what through a lot of these conversations on this podcast so far, it's I keep coming back to this idea of like knowing yourself enough to be able to reflect in spaces, to be able to make it's safe for other people. It's like that sort of internal understanding and bringing yourself and just being yourself enables so much for others.
Yes. And that has to, for me, that has to include being big enough to say when you've got it wrong, or to acknowledge things that you haven't done as well as you wanted to, or admitting that you don't, actually you can't do something because you've bitten off more than you could chew, or you need somebody's help, or whatever it is. And that showing vulnerability, I think, is really important. This is probably not, I mean, it's a time-bound issue, but Jacinda, what's her name? What's her surname? Yes, Jacinda Ardern, resigning as New Zealand Prime Minister, saying that she's got nothing left in the tank, that the time has come to recognise that somebody else needs to take on the job. The backlash on Twitter, the absolute poison dripping from people's, well, not pens, but keyboards, as that they kind of basically lay into her integrity. And I think that's vulnerable, but it's also genuinely true leadership, I think.
Yeah. The being brave, because we talked, has come up a lot as well about safe and yet brave spaces, and how those things need to sort of work in tandem to truly, be where we need to be, and especially in research as well. We're meeting people for the first time and asking them often to reveal so much of themselves. Feeling safe enough to be vulnerable, to show that bravery is coming out a lot. Bravery is, I think it's a great word, and it's a great point of reference. I remember when I came out, obviously that took a degree. For me personally, it took a lot of bravery because I was scared about it, and it was a massive step. But what I hadn't kind of immediately appreciated was that I had to keep being brave, time after time after time, and I still do now, even though it's kind of second nature now. I still, when I work with a new client, or I'm talking to a prospect, or even when I'm talking to participants in research, I still have to come out on a daily basis. Because I still, and I get that in the conversation. I get it in as soon as I can. I will drop it in very early on in the conversation, because well, two reasons. One, I don't want to be having questions asked of me that force me to out myself in a way when I'm on the back foot, as it were. And secondly, I just think it helps people understand who they're dealing with. Because if I tell you that, I'm a gay woman, and I've got a wife and I've got a son, and that's, at my discretion, I've told you that, then you already know not to mess with me. Because I am fully owning who I am, and I'm fully comfortable with that. And I want you to know that, because then, knowing that, then you and we can share something about our lives, and I can, include you in my life in a bit more of a real and human way, and hopefully vice versa. But on the other hand, if you have a problem with it, then we have a problem, and we may as well get that out on the table early on. And that's how I control my own
safety in terms of my identity. Because I was, at that time, I'd got involved in Pride, I was feeling more, I was feeling the responsibility of being a role model, because I had not had role models. And I was realising that actually in Pride was dominated by basically white gay men. And, it was, even being a lesbian in that environment, you were a minority in a minority, and they just didn't, they looked at everything through the lens of the white gay male, not anybody else. And there are a lot of battles that you've got to fight in that situation. And the sort of the first one was actually there's more than one gender. Let's just start there, shall we? And so I wasn't, I didn't want those two worlds to be, well, three worlds, any worlds. I didn't want my worlds to be separate. I wanted them to be, to be part of the same thing. And I wanted also to be a role model for people within the business, and to stand up for inclusion, stand against discrimination of any kind, and to be a vocal, proponent of inclusion. And I'm very, very far from perfect in this respect, and I still have an enormous amount to learn. But that's my desire.
Yeah, fascinating to hear about those different experiences and how it cuts across spaces and places as well. And I'd be interested just to hear a little bit more about Pride and what that felt like and how that compares, and if there are any differences between navigating those. Well,
I used to say that I'd never really met with such sexism until I got involved in Pride and the LGBTQ community in that active sort of activist way, if you like. Definitely encountered more of that in that world than I had in my professional world, which felt odd.
Yeah, it's very counterintuitive.
Yes, but we are one community made up of many communities, and I think it was a struggle in that sense, because I guess I was coming from a place where I was comfortable in my own position and my own status, and then I felt, wait a minute, nobody's even thinking about how women might feel about this. And over time, we brought on board more women into the senior leadership team, and that started to shift things a little bit. And I had some partners in crime in that sense, and developed, hopefully challenged some of the thinking and things to be. There's still a lot out there. There's still a lot out there. I had an exchange on Twitter the other day. It was probably ill-judged. I think I'd had a couple of glasses of wine. Yeah. But somebody had posted a picture of, I think they were in Ireland, and it was a picture from a male public loos. And I don't know what the brand was, but or what the campaign was, but there were pictures behind the urinals of women who were sort of pointing and laughing in a certain direction. Mm-hmm. And this guy was like, this is awful. I shouldn't have to put up with this. And I, effectively, and I'm a gay guy, and I had responded to this. But yeah, imagine if you were a woman and for decades you've been putting up with topless calendars every time you went into a garage or a takeaway or a DIY shop, and that's all I'd said. And then this guy was like, not the guy who posted the picture, but somebody else was like, properly took me to task on it. And he was like, I was just thinking to myself, that inability to kind of transfer, it just staggered me. The unwillingness to think about something that had offended you through the eyes of people, an entire class of people who have suffered much worse and put up with much worse. And where were you? What did you say about it? You didn't say anything until it affected you. So I think you've got to talk up about the things that affect other people's safety, and that you have to show solidarity if you want that back for yourself.
Do you think things have? I mean, you sort of spoken a bit about Pride then, that things have, did you see a change, and how did you have to, or how did you conceptualize safety and space when thinking about like Pride as an event as well?
Yeah.
Like as.
I mean, I think things ebb and flow. I think that's the nature of the beast, to be honest. But one of the things that I'm very proud of, and it might not seem a particularly big thing, but to me it had huge symbolism and was very important in terms of creating a safe space for women, was that I brought back the women's stage. So what happens in Pride in London is that there are various stages. Trafalgar Square is the main stage, if you like, and then there's a cabaret stage and various other things. So, but when I originally got involved, there wasn't a stage for women. There had been previously, but it had fallen by the wayside, and women tend to be underrepresented at Pride events. They're certainly underrepresented in the organisation. And they, if you talk to women or research them as I have done, they do feel a bit kind of squeezed out and oppressed, and there aren't the bars for women that there are for gay men. There aren't safe spaces in the same way. It's different. So there is a genuine and tangible difference there. But anyway, so I argued for the reinstatement of a women's stage, and the first time it was a little kind of stage on Dean Street, and it was sort of next to the cabaret stage, and it wasn't particularly impressive. But then we secured Leicester Square for it, and it had its own space, and it has its own space, and it's still, it's still there. And so for women, including trans women and people who identify as non-binary, that is a safe space that I had, that I played more than a small part in, and I'm proud of that. And I think that these things do make a difference. And you don't know, you don't necessarily see what difference that makes to people because you're not talking to everybody there, but you can read about it afterwards and you hear things, and actually if it made one person's experience safer, then it was worth it. And then we, for the first few years of my involvement, I was the marketing director. It's all voluntary, or was all voluntary, and so I would, and we relied very heavily on the goodwill of pro bono work from agencies, and I was, in the early days of that, I was always a thorn in their side, saying, what I want is, I want this campaign to be made up of real people in the community who reflect the diversity in the community. So, I'm super proud that, I am the first marketing director, certainly in the UK, maybe in the world, to have had trans couples in advertising.
You should be very proud of that. That's very impressive. Yeah. So
things like that are fabulous. And there's still points in time. Actually, any culture change is part war of attrition and part sort of incremental gains, isn't it? So
Yeah. Thinking about research specifically, what do you think we, as an industry and generally, can learn from your experiences and practice when it comes to safety?
I'm not so much, I don't know about learning from me, so much as there are things that we need to learn from in wider society and what we observe going on in popular culture and in kind of cultural discourse around inclusion and around addressing addressing things that don't work for everybody, or only work for a section of society. And I think research has a massive role to play in terms of shining a light on that, and not defaulting to the highest common denominator. No, the lowest common denominator, which is the highest and the biggest group in society, just because that's the easiest thing to do. And we ought to be leading the way on that, and we ought to have more of a point of view than we do. I got really exercised a couple of weeks back over a poll that had been published on Twitter. I won't say who by, but one of the big polling companies. And it was a leading question related to Meghan Markle. And the conclusion that they had drawn was that, most people were comfortable that coverage of Meghan Markle hadn't been racist. And in actual fact, that's not what the data said. Like, literally looking at the data, that's not what the data said. Let alone the fact that it was a question that was deliberately worded in such a way as to produce the answer that would have been palatable to the Daily Mail. That kind of stuff enrages me, because it's irresponsible, it doesn't show us off in a good light, and it is. I mean, really, I think that kind of thing should be censured. It's just not on. We should be better than that. And I don't, people can say, oh, it's just, but no, I think it reflects badly on us all. And I think that it needs people to stand up and say, actually, no, we need to be, we can't just talk about inclusion, and we can't just have it written into our own internal policies. We need to do it. We need to behave it in the way that we work.
We need to just talk about you. So how do you create a sense of safety in your everyday life, and is that something that you sort of proactively engage with yourself and for yourself?
I don't think that this will surprise you to know, but I'm not the world's best at self-care. I think going back to I suppose my childhood, I've always been the kind of person who likes being outdoors, and in particular I like being in the woods, and so there are several places near where I live that are just sort of go-to places to feel calmer and to feel better. Apparently you should spend 15 minutes every day in the woods, and if we were all to do that, then that would, we would all be much healthier. And then the other thing for me is music. My real happy place is the Huey show on Six Music on a Saturday morning. And nobody else likes it in the house. They don't get it. It's kind of like, a lot of 1970s funk and disco, a lot of R&B and rap and what have you, and I love it. And I'll tweet him about how I love that particular song. I haven't heard that in ages. And, I love that. So I love kind of listening to the Huey show with a cup of coffee, and ideally on my own, which basically never happens. But sometimes I get in my car and I go out for a drive just so I can listen to a bit of the Huey show on my own. In my own
Your
space.
own safe space.
Yeah, the car is my safe space, definitely my safe space.
And if you had to choose one song that sort of represents, I guess, you and feeling yourself and feeling safe, is there one?
Yes, it is a song by an American folk artist called Dar Williams, singer-songwriter. And she wrote a song about Spring Street. It's called Spring Street, and it's a song about starting again, and about how starting again is possible, how you can leave one situation and enter another and become the person that you want to be. And I really, really have always identified with that with that song, and it was very meaningful to me when I was coming out.
Brilliant. That's pretty much everything apart from the final question, which is...
Is it a good one?
I hope so.
Is it a killer question?
How do you do you?
I do me by getting outside in the fresh air, pulling on my walking boots and going off for a couple of hours, getting lost and relying on the fact that my phone is connected to my car so I can always find my way back.
That's a good tip, actually. I never thought of that before. Great. Thank you very much for your time and contribution. It's been great having you.
Thank you.